Be with you all again. I'm Patty Brigham, the president of the Florida League of Women Voters, and we are absolutely delighted tonight to have this special presentation with Commissioner of Agriculture in Florida, Nikki Fried. I want to give a shout out, a special shout out to our State Poverty Action Chair, and that is Beth Hovind, who worked so hard to make this presentation happen. But before we start, I'd like to give you a little background on the commissioner. Nikki Fried, of course, Florida's 12th Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, is a lifelong Floridian, attorney, and passionate activist. She was born and raised in Miami and graduated from the University of Florida, where she received her bachelor's, master's, and Juris Doctor degrees. While at UF, she has served as student body president, the first woman to hold the position in nearly 2 decades. Woohoo! That's awesome. As an attorney, she was head of the felony division of at the Alachua County the Public Defender's Office and worked in private practice in South Florida, defending homeowners against foreclosure during the 2007-2008 housing crisis. Prior to being elected, Commissioner Fried worked at law firms as a government consultant, advocating on behalf of clients before the Florida legislature. In 2017, she formed her own firm to advocate in Tallahassee for at-risk children, the Broward County School Board, and for the expansion of patient access to medical marijuana. So welcome again, Commissioner, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Beth Hovind right now, who will give a very brief presentation.
And anyone who knows me knows that we have to talk about poverty to be able to continue the conversation. And I'm trying to get the slideshow. Is that a full screen or not?
No, I think you want to present from current slide.
Current slide? Okay. All right, great. Thank you. The Poverty Action Team has been in existence only for a couple of years, and it was started by a group of women who began looking at the issues that we were having within our society. And I'm not sure now how I move this on. I've lost my controls here.
Hi, Beth. You should be able to just click or press the space bar on your keyboard.
And one of the first things we found was, well, 20% of the children under 18 in Florida are living in poverty. And we found, this was in 2015, and we are only guessing at this point with COVID that these numbers are increasing dramatically. And if you look at the states, you can find your county, and you'll find that some counties, such as the Jacksonville area, have 16% of their children in poverty, but other counties, such as the DeSoto County, in more the central part of the state, have 41% of their children in poverty. And this is creating a lot of difficulties across the spectrum of issues that the League is worried about. It affects healthcare, access to healthcare. It affects access to housing, homelessness rates. It affects juvenile justice. The low-income children are more likely to end up in severe juvenile justice facilities, criminal behavior. Education is very impacted by the number of low-income students who are in the facility. And we're finding here in our time of voter access that voters who live in low-income areas are less likely to participate in the election. And we add natural resources and pollution areas. If you look at the Superfund sites around the state, you often find them if they're in cities connected to low-income areas. So there are a lot of reasons to be looking at poverty in Florida. Our Poverty Action Task Force is committed to changing the negative outcomes of poverty and increasing the life opportunities for all residents. Some of the statistics we have, you can see on the screen. What I'm concerned about is poverty is not rationed proportionately. 18% of white children are poor, but over a third of Black children grow up in poverty. And 27% of Latinx children are growing up in poverty. And this has serious ramifications. some of the studies that are being done about poverty across the country are suggesting that living in poverty itself without any other characteristics can create some great deficiencies on the part of children. So in 2017, we started looking around the state at the areas that perhaps we could have some influence in the league in resolving some of the issues around poverty. We had a huge statewide convention of individuals, advocates, scholars, service providers, identifying areas where the state legislature could have some impact in reducing the issues of poverty. And these were the 4 issues that went, whoops, I'm moving along here, that went to the state league in June of 2019, and they agreed to support these 4 issues. Number 1 being Sadowski Housing Trust, which for 15 years, the money which was supposed to be set aside for affordable housing was instead being transferred to the general fund. One of the other areas we were concerned about is the quality of preschool education. We were finding low-income children were not testing well as they went into kindergarten. Their preschool services were not of the quality that would have engaged their minds to the point where they could compete with the other children in kindergarten, and also quality daycare issues. We also looked at the issue of mass transportation, which is a problem for low-income families. And the last was the support for increases in some of the programs that we have set up to help low-income people. For example, I don't know how many of you are familiar with TANF, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. It's a cash assistance program to help families who are living below the poverty level. And for a mother with 2 children, her grant is $305 a month. Across the state of Florida, the average cost for an apartment is $895 a month. And so with our support, she's not even going to be able to support herself. In the 2019 legislative session, we focused on these issues, and I would say we did 50-50. The Sadowski funds made it through the legislature, but the governor is currently holding the money because of the COVID issues. The preschool program has been relegated to the Department of Education. We're watching that to try to see whether it will in fact improve preschool opportunities for low-income students. Mass transit has had no action, and none of the programs have had any action either. We'll be working on those in the next session. What we are finding out is with COVID, everything is getting worse. Fewer people are employed. The unemployment rate is about 44% nationally. 2.1 million individuals are applying for unemployment insurance, re-employment insurance, it's called in Florida. And in the housing area, one of the concerns we have is there has been, since the beginning of COVID, a moratorium on being able to evict individuals from housing situations. And Patty's been very good about writing letters to the governor, encouraging him to extend the moratorium. It's currently extended till the end of July. But when the census surveys that have been done suggest that at least 40% of the population in Florida has either no or slight confidence in their ability to pay the next month's rent. And this is going to cause serious disruption in all of the areas of people's lives. There's a minimum of at least 2,600 evictions in the various counties in Florida waiting to be filed, the minimum that the moratorium is ended. So you can contact your clerk of courts to find out what happens in your county. But the question is, where do these people go? We also know that the food stamp population has increased 40% since February in the state of Florida. Our people are in trouble. Poor people are hurting. Middle-income people are hurting. The map that you have in front of you right now was developed by Karen Owen, and it shows you on a county-county basis what the percentage of food insecurity increased since COVID. And you can see it extends from 34% to 90%. The darker the color, the more serious is the food insecurity issue. And this is the reason that we've invited Commissioner Freed to talk with us tonight, because they have some connection with the food issues. I want to encourage all of you in the league to join us in our Poverty Action Team. These are some of the numbers, the ways to contact us, and we would love to hear from you. And with that, I'm going to turn the session over to Commissioner Freed.
Well, thank you so much, Beth and Patty and all of the Florida Women League Voter Poverty Action Committee for hosting this meeting. Again, I am Commissioner Nikki Freed. And as we all know, a big part of, maybe just changed my screen and all my notes. Give me 2 seconds, sorry about that. Give me 2 seconds, I apologize. We just lost my notes for a second. So we all know that a big part of poverty is food insecurity, which is why this has been such a top priority of my administration. You know, just kind of a little bit of background on why this is so important to me is that, first of all, growing up in Miami, I started my own soup kitchen when I was in high school. So my junior and senior year, every single Saturday evening, I traveled all throughout Miami and collected all this food. And then Sunday morning went down to Camilla's house and did our own soup kitchen on Sundays, and got an opportunity to talk to a lot of people. And you know, the stories that you heard from people that were unfortunately in line were inspiring though. Were inspiring, and it's something that has always stuck into me, that this is something that I wanted to always engage in. And, you know, and then as time went on, I was in the public defender's office. And so I saw firsthand too, so much poverty, and so much of that, again, continued to inspire me to want to make a difference and to want to do good things. And I've basically really along my journey, and especially, you know, now that we oversee the food and nutrition program for the entire state, you know, really recognizing the interconnection between when people have food and have access to food, they succeed. You know, we know when our children can't eat, and they can't be successful in our school systems. If their parents are also not having nutritional meals, not only are they increasing their health concerns and diabetes and overweight and other medical conditions, which is another drain on our healthcare system, but they're also not able to fully meet the needs that they may have in the workforce. And so they're not as successful and not as efficient in the workforce. So as I kind of have gone through my journey, realizing that this has had to be a major pillar for me in my administration, so much so that inauguration, when I was on Tuesday, on Monday, we actually went to up here at First Harvest, up here in the Big Bend in Tallahassee, and did an entire day of packing backpacks and food for families up here in Tallahassee. Had my entire team, all my family who were in town for inauguration, just to show how important that is to me personally, and how important it is for the mission inside of the Department of Agriculture. So since taking office, we've been working statewide to fight against hunger and food insecurity, ensuring families across the entire state can access wholesome, fresh meals. You know, Florida produces a huge volume and variety of farm fresh foods, with over 300 different commodities grown right here in the state of Florida. Yet, nearly 3 million Floridians suffer from chronic hunger and food insecurity, including 850,000 of our kids. With many of our states challenging stemming from the lack of access to nutritious food, hunger creates statewide impacts that have direct effects on our communities and the environment. You know, and as I travel the state and I go to a lot of chambers of commerces, lots of business opportunities across the entire state, I talk a lot about food insecurity. And trying to make everybody understand that this is not just an issue that is affecting one part of our state or in certain parts of our communities, but this really has a dramatic impact on everybody, you know, the entire workforce and the healthcare system, and really trying to engage our business community to understand and to open their eyes about what can be done and the severity of what is happening in our state. Our agency funds the Florida's $1.3 billion school lunch program that serves about 245 million free or reduced meals and lunches to over 2 million of our kids every single year, to ensure that no child goes hungry. I've also called for universal breakfast because, again, when so many of our kids are coming to school and these are the only meals that they're counting on, lunch isn't enough. when they're starting the day having to learn, breakfast is essential. And the problem is that while we know that so many of our schools are offering breakfast programs and free and reduced breakfast, we also know that there's a stigma that's attached to going into the cafeteria and actually asking for it. So we really have challenged our school districts to think outside the box, come up with new creative ways to bring the food to the children in a more universal format. But with schools closed during COVID, my team went into action almost immediately. Even before we had gotten word from Commissioner Corcoran that schools were going to be closed on that subsequent Monday, the previous week, my team was already filling out paperwork with the USDA for waivers on the school lunch programs, seeing that we can enhance some of the programs that were going to be done typically over the summers, and working with our school districts around the clock, making sure that they had a plan in place and how we can support them as we saw our schools closing back in, I feel like it was forever ago, back March, April. So today we have over 2,500 of our summer break spots statewide that's serving free meals for children since COVID had closed our schools. We have served already 23.7 million meals from March to April. And another thing that we did was we made sure that, as parents were unfortunately losing their jobs and people were going to be on and off these eligibility lists, we didn't care. If they were 18 and under and they showed up to one of these sites, they were going to get fed because children typically wouldn't be showing up if they didn't need food. So we acted very quickly and to apply for these waivers and to make sure that we could have operational even during the school year for all of our summer programs. So we worked with all the school districts to ensure the meals were served in line with the CDC recommendations, allowing the grab and go meal options for multiple days worth of meals. We also were encouraging a lot, especially in some of our more poverty-stricken communities where maybe their parents didn't have a car, they were relying on buses to take the kids to and from school, to see how we couldn't get the meals onto the school bus route. So a lot of our rural communities and some of the communities that are dealing with some of the more inner cities had this as an option. A big component in our fight against hunger has been creating programs that incentivize schools to increase the student participation also in these meals. Last year alone, we created a hunger-free campus initiative, which encourages schools to implement innovative methods to reduce food insecurity on school campuses across the entire state. We also teamed up with Florida Dairy Council and No Kid Hungry to launch the Florida School Breakfast Challenge. This goes back into my mission to have a universal breakfast. It's to encourage alternative school breakfast service models like the grab and go breakfast and serving breakfasts right in the classroom, helping to get nutritious meals into the hands of all of our students. FDACS also administers our Emergency Food Assistance Program, otherwise known as TFAP, to make sure that food is available for all of our low-income families. During COVID-19, we also secured 1 million low-sodium meals for seniors for community group distribution. In April, we worked with the state to receive approval for the online SNAP, allowing nearly 3 million of our Floridians to deliver groceries straight to their homes, allowing for safe access to food. In collaboration with the Department of Children and Families, FDACS was instrumental in securing the pandemic EBT, which provides nutritious benefits to families of 2.1 million Florida children eligible for the free and reduced school lunch, and again, ensuring that no child is going hungry. Unfortunately, we have been hearing that there is some confusion among many families who are receiving these PIA EBT cards. Many are not aware that about the program in general, and because the cards come in unmarked envelopes, they think that it's a scam and unfortunately have thrown it away. If families receive cards and aren't sure, they can certainly contact DCF to verify MyFL Family, which is at myflfamilies.com. Again, so if anybody is on here and wants to distribute it, it's myflfamilies.com. Ag, as many of you may know, is one of our state's largest industries. We're actually the second largest economic driver. But because of our economic downturn and because tourism was at a standstill, agriculture actually has become #1 economic driver for our state. With food service demand for bulk orders plummeting, millions of crops though still sat on the fields unused. And the Florida farmers across our state face up to $522 million in economic losses. So we kind of went into action and thought outside the box of ways to connect our local farmers to food banks, our local farmers to the communities, and reminding everybody, all their consumers, to also do their part by supporting our farmers. We did by actually starting off our Florida Grown Commodities website. And so that way it was an exchange between all of our ag producers and our local communities, allowing our ag producers to go online and update as far as what commodities they had available. And individual consumers or food banks or other local restaurants were able to go right onto this website and connect with their local farmers, also find out where all the U-Picks were located, find out where all the farmers markets were. And so everybody needs to always be doing their part, making sure that they're buying in their food store Florida grown commodities. Always look for that Fresh from Florida logo if it's there. I've also really encouraged our consumers, everybody keeps asking, what can consumers do to really help our agriculture community and to make sure that agriculture is strong here in the state? That if in fact you're seeing that your grocery stores were not stocking up with Fresh from Florida or Florida grown commodities, go complain. Go complain to the managers, to the people that are working there, and demand the Fresh from Florida, Florida grown produce, or stop buying it. Stop buying the commodities that are coming in from other parts of the country, and not so much the country, but really the world, and more so Mexico and South America and Central America, because our purse strings have a lot of power. So really asking everybody to really do their part. But also during COVID, what we did was we reached out to so many of our food industry partners and to really encourage them, like such as the Publix and the Walmarts and Fresh Market, to really be purchasing more and more of our locally grown produce, because our farmers were struggling with so much of our food service, like restaurants and theme parks and cruise lines closed or worked to a limited capacity. It really was very detrimental to so many of our local farmers. So right on our website, which is Florida Farm to You, which can be found at fdax.gov/Florida Farm to You. You can find the commodities exchange right there, find out where all the local farmers are, and thank them. Because during COVID, they were the essential workforce. They went out there every single day, sunrise to sunfall, and everything in between and afterwards, and to making sure that they were out there picking our fruits and vegetables, making sure that we were still having access to them during COVID. We heard some amazing feedback from our online portal. We had about 500,000 hits within the first month. And so we're definitely going to continue this even after the pandemic because of the big uptake. What I've also said is there has been a consumer conscious awakening that's happened, that I think people across the entire state for sure saw all of the different stories about the food being left on the vines and being plowed under and milk being poured out. And so a lot of people across the entire state said, what can we do? And so they really were looking for their local farmers. In fact, there was a farmer here in Tallahassee that I was speaking to a couple weeks ago that she's used to an online purchasing from locals here. And she typically put together about 40 boxes a week. She got to the point of almost 500 boxes a week that she had to shut it down and not take any new consumers. So showing how much people are starting to actually wake up, wanting to know where their food is coming from. And it's a really great opportunity to educate our communities, to fight poverty, fight insecurity, food insecurity, by really giving more access and teaching people in communities too, how to do rural and urban farms, how to do vertical farms on rooftops, community gardens. And that's something that my team has been really working hard on, so that more and more people can actually take power into their own hands and start actually growing their own fruits and vegetables, which, as you know, is so vital to the success of individuals in work and in health and just success in life. So again, if you want to go to that website, it's fdax.gov/Florida Farm to You. So the other issues that we have been dealing with also inside of FDAX during COVID is unfortunately our unemployment system. With this mismanagement of the Florida unemployment system, many of our Floridians were left unable to feed their families. So we have been also planning ahead to continuously evaluate the needs of our state. So we have been also thinking ahead what's going to happen come the fall. Where's our unemployment numbers going to be? So we have been in direct communication on a pretty consistent basis with Department of Emergency Management, coming up with outside the box ideas, because at some point, families are no longer going to want just boxed foods. They're going to want hot prepared meals and some dignity in that. So we've been working with some of our partners across the world actually to see what that looks like, what types of kitchens are available, How do we get our ag producers to kind of allocate a certain amount of their produce for Florida-only specific entities? And so we're working through that right now. And, of course, we hope that we don't need that, but we certainly are preparing for it and working with, again, emergency management and FEMA, trying to see what kind of dollars can be coming down to the state to be preparing for things like this. Also, in terms of what the state and federal government should be doing to respond to address this global pandemic, leadership starts at the top. And I can't stress enough the need for competent leadership that tells the truth. It's transparent and puts the safety and health of our people first. With positivity rates skyrocketing to unheard of numbers. I think yesterday was at 24%. Hospitalization, ICU beds are dwindling and the usages are up. We need clear and uniform messages focusing on ways to save the lives, not just here in Florida, but across the entire country. We know that the US is very different than potentially Europe. People travel all over the states for business, for travel, and everything in between. And until which time we in the state of Florida can get this pandemic under control, people aren't going to come here. In fact, I have some good friends in the military. The military has told service personnel that Florida is no longer a safe place for destination for either work or for travel, and is not allowing servicemen and women to travel to the state of Florida. So we've got to be doing our part, because from everything that I have seen, government's failing its people, from the White House to the governor's office. And unfortunately, we're going to have to take it into our own hands and be doing our part. That means wearing masks. We know that masks don't stop the spread of the virus, but it certainly slows it down. I don't know exactly how this has become a political issue. It's communism versus patriotism. That's insane. We all have to wear seatbelts in the car. We all have to put our children into car seats. No texting and driving. We can't walk around our streets naked. That's actually a criminal offense. And so it's insane that masks have become politicized and polarizing. If you're not going to wear it for yourself, at least wear it for your family members and the friends and the people that you interact with. Continue social distancing. We know that's also the great way to make sure that you're preventing the spread. Continue to stay 6 feet apart from one another. Avoid crowds as much as possible. Continue to use hand sanitizer and soap and water. And what I keep also telling people is that, look, just because a restaurant is open, or just because a movie theater is open, or Disney is opening over this weekend, just because these places are open doesn't mean that we need to go. And especially if you are finding that there's different types of retail or restaurant establishments or hotels that are not following the CDC guidelines and some of the restrictions that have been put in place locally, one, don't go. And two, report it. We have actually opened up our consumer hotline, which is 1-800-HELP-FLA or FloridaConsumerHelp.com. So that way we can help with the actual implementation and enforcement of some of these regulations, because that's unfortunately the part of the problem, is that so many businesses let down their guards. When we had a president and a governor who basically said, mission accomplished, nothing to see here, move on with your lives, a lot of these businesses and individuals let down their guards, had a false sense of security, and went out and about, continue to gather now in crowds. And of course, we're seeing this just tremendous spikes all across the state. But I cannot thank you enough for having me be part of this conversation. Know that you have a friend in Tallahassee. These issues are near and dear to my heart, things that I will continue to fight for, because I understand it's, the understanding of poverty and food insecurity. People think it's just people who are homeless, and they don't understand that so many of our families, mothers are working 2 jobs if they're single mothers. Families are working 2 to 3 even with parents that are still both a mother and a father there. And yet sometimes you just need a little bit of a hand up. Not so much a handout, but a hand up for that month if there's been, medical bills piling up, or a family crisis. And so we need to be doing our part, making sure that we have access to healthy, nutritious food, making sure that we are all working together to recognize that this is something that impacts all of us, and that it could be any day where you might lose your job, COVID related or not, may not have had enough savings in your bank account. And while you're looking for a job, there might just not be enough money there to put food on your family's table. And so giving families that dignity, knowing that we are going to be here for them, knowing that we're going to work with them to get them back onto the other side of poverty, because I think that's the ultimate goal. But in the meanwhile, is being present, being thoughtful, being empathetic, and being a resource to so many of our families that really truly are suffering all across the state. So thank you for what you do every single day. We are here to help and to be a partner as we go forward. And you certainly can follow any of our updates on Facebook or Twitter FDAX, at FDAX. Online is also fdax.gov. So again, thank you, and I will turn it back to you.
Okay, and thank you so much. One of the things that I think we need is a list of all the resources you mentioned.
Sure.
We went through them fairly rapidly. We can send that out to people afterwards, and that would
Absolutely.
be great. One of the questions I had was, I'm understanding with the agricultural issues that undocumented workers are being particularly hard hit as farms are not, agricultural places are closing down. Does your agency do anything for the undocumented workers?
So here's the situation with the workforce. So you've got two sets of workforce. You've got the migrant workers, the ones that are coming in that are on contract laborers through the Department of Labor actually oversees all of those contracts. And so they come into the state under certain contracts, and then they get moved around from Florida. When they're done in the harvest, they can even do 2 or 3 harvests in the state of Florida, and then they move on to Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, other parts of the state. So the Department of Labor oversees those contractors. And while we oversee agriculture, it is still a private entity. We've been having calls twice a week with all of agriculture across the state, asking, do you have all the necessary PPE? Do you have all the necessary health issues? If there's an uptick like we saw in Immokalee, talking to the local county commissioners, city commissioners, departments of health, the local health department there, seeing what is the situation, and us kind of coming in and helping, whether it's to get them more testing, more contact tracing. So that's one issue. The second is the ones that actually live here in the state of Florida, where they are part of the harvest during when Florida is in the harvest season. And then they also, during the off season, may travel to other parts of that general area, whether it's to do yard work or handyman work, or and those communities, unfortunately, there's a lot of, it's mostly low income. And so there's a lot of health concerns there, a lot of just everybody living kind of on top of each other in these communities. So what we have been able to do inside of agriculture is a couple of things. One is really enforce, because we don't have any power, like we regulate them on certain things, but we can't force them to make these things available. But they are just as concerned, because if their workforce gets sick, they don't have people to work the fields. So they are tuned in to make sure that there's not only PPE, but social distancing, and to make sure that everything at the actual farms themselves, at the processing plants, are following all the CDC guidelines. The issue is that when they come home, because you're living right on top of each other, and they don't have great access to healthcare. And the problem too is that you're finding is that a lot of these, whether documented or undocumented or residents here, they still have a inherent distrust for government. And so even if there happens to be an outbreak, they're not wanting assistance from the state, because they don't trust, because they've seen potentially family members and ICE coming in and taking some of their family members. So this is something that we're all consciously working through. And the other problem is that if you have somebody who goes and gets tested, who is asymptomatic, and then they test positive, and then you tell them that they have to stay home for 2 weeks and can't send money back to their family, whether it's in Mexico, Venezuela, it is an issue. So we are racking our brains on trying to work through this. We had a call with, I saw somebody chime in about our community relationship between UF and IFAS. We had an all ag call with UF and IFAS probably about 2 weeks ago, and another one at the end of this month, to be talking through, because we're done harvesting here in the state. So harvest is done for the state. I think there may be 1 or 2 of our avocados, maybe watermelon, that's kind of at the last week or so. But all of those workforce come back into the state at the end of August, beginning of September. So what are we doing to make sure that when they come back into the state, that we are doing temperature testing, education? We've got a language barrier. A lot of them speak Mayan. and especially kind of in the Indian River area. So figuring out somebody who speaks Mayan to be able to translate any of our educational information. We have a lot of the locals, unions and workforce and that are working, Doctors Without Borders, who are working with us in some of these areas as well, to really kind of pinpoint what we can be doing when they come back and to make sure that they're safe. So AG has done its part, and it's just a matter of, you know, it's a complicated situation, but we're doing everything we can, thinking through that if we have an outbreak in any of these, whether it's temporary housing or the permanent housing, trying to get FEMA trailers from, you know, the leftover that might have been from Hurricane Michael, get them over to this area, contract with potentially local motels or hotels that may have some vacancies that we can make makeshift hospitals if necessary, or relocate people that may be COVID positive or reverse. So these are things that we're working through to make sure that we're protecting that workforce when they come back.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question that, that we have is, does Florida have any gleaning programs?
We do. We have a significant amount of gleaning programs. And a lot of them are through charitable organizations that contract with whether it's Farm Share or Feeding Florida, that actually go out there, and some of them have programs that they're actually getting paid for, because both Farm Share and Feeding Florida have money from the Florida budget and then pay for some of these programs and for people to glean, to actually help gleaning. The other things that I've been trying to work on too is that we know that so many of our kids have to get volunteer hours to graduate high school. So trying to encourage and trying to get the Department of Education or put it into actual legislation to allow our students to be able to go onto the farms and actually volunteer for any of these gleaning programs.
Great, great. Well, thank you. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Patty. There's just so much information. I'm just like overwhelmed with everything. But let's turn it back to Patty, and she can handle the questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And Commissioner Freed, we have many questions in the chat box, and I'll try to get to as many as we can. I don't think we're going to get to all of them. But let me start with this. Could you please give us, and this is from Rebecca, give us an update on how SNAP is being used in Florida? Bread for the World is asking for an increase of maximum monthly SNAP benefit by 15%. And Rebecca is concerned that the Sadowski Fund may again be robbed this year.
So Department of Agriculture doesn't actually oversee SNAP. That is done by Department of Children and Families. So we interact with the SNAP program. I think I mentioned in my talking points that we worked with DCF to help get them the USDA waiver for it to be online purchases. But certainly, we are in tune with what's happening with SNAP, because it impacts so many of, the parents that are on SNAP. Obviously, their kids are in our care with the school nutrition program. Certainly, the SNAP benefits are never going to be enough. I think that the president actually decreased the eligibility for SNAP. We were very vocal on that situation. But so we have a lot of work to do, but it's actually not overseen by FDACS, it's overseen by the Department of Children and Families.
Okay. Question from Mike: is the department partnering with the University of Florida IFAS in any programs?
Yes. So IFAS and UF is one of our greatest partners. So one is the agricultural-based research part of the University of Florida for agriculture. So there's a lot that we do with IFAS. We take research back and forth and try to help with the farmers. And just earlier this morning, actually, is that this morning? I lose track of days and times. This morning we had a big press conference that the Walmart Foundation was giving us $100,000 to distribute to rural communities. And the money is actually going to Living Healthy, which is an IFAS program. And then the money will go through them to local farmers to help with some of the rural communities and the food banks. So we do everything between money that comes through us for research on citrus greening, to helping to create new genetics. Any type of research that's been done on hemp. They were one of our first pilot programs in the hemp fields. So I can go on for probably a very long time to show all the interrelationship between FDACS and IFAS.
Thank you. And this is from Ruth. Is the campaign to get the $15 hour minimum wage set so out of reach that it has been relinquished? It seems to me that all issues of poverty would be assisted with income increase. Also, it would increase the earned income tax credit.
So I am not actually engaged in that constitutional amendment. I believe it got onto the ballot. So it should be onto the ballot for 2020. And I think that during COVID, even more so, it brought to light the disparagement between our middle class and our lower class and our workforce and the essential workforce. The individuals who were making, hourly wages are the ones who were actually part of our essential businesses that had to be out and about during COVID. So I don't know the details. I'm not actively engaged in that campaign, but certainly we can find out some more information if you so need to.
Thank you. From Bridget, do you have plans to push KEP in schools at any point? Lee County has been successful in this.
In caps for schools?
Yeah, she's spelled it CEP, but it may be CAP.
Okay, I see it. Do you push for? I'm not familiar with that program, so
maybe she'll text.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that, Bridget.
She did just put in the bottom of the chat that CEP is Community Eligibility Provision.
Okay. And again, my food nutrition director may be more in the weeds on that, but we can certainly follow up with some of those aspects. But it's not something that I personally have been actually engaged in. But we can certainly look into that and get back to you, Bridget, and talk more offline with my division director who's over the food nutrition and wellness.
You may have touched upon this, but I'm going to go ahead. This is Bridget again. Can you elaborate on the $440,000 farm to school grants that FDACS just received this week, and how the money will be utilized as our schools are revising their contingency plans from COVID?
Yes, so I know 100,000 came here to Leon County, so it gets distributed, and it's such farm to school programs are so fantastic. I've had an opportunity to visit a lot of our programs across the state, and what it does is, every school district's a little bit different. Every school's a little bit different of how they do it. Some have actually ag in the classroom and actually have full-fledged agricultural classes, and then the kids actually go out, and a part of this classroom experience is actually creating their own farms and learning about agriculture. Other schools, it's kind of incorporates, if you've got a 4-H in your actual school, then they are part of it. But basically, it's an opportunity to really teach the next generation to get excited about agriculture. And it's really an opportunity for so many of our kids to have hands-on learning experiences. And I've been talking a lot about trying to expand this program because, one, you're teaching kids to love ag. Two, you're teaching them to understand why it's important to have nutritious meals. And then when a kid actually gets to plant their own heads of carrots and then they get to pick it out, that there's just some pride aspect into that. And then they take that education and they take it back home. And, I've got 3 stepsons and I've got a niece and a nephew, and every single time that they have hands-on experiences like this, I know my niece went down to a recycling plant last year and came back. It was like, Aunt Nikki, do you know that you cannot recycle a pizza box unless it's, and so the farm to school programs are so fantastic. So basically how it works is it's been allocated to the state, and then the school districts themselves have to apply with their program in order to then get the money for the school districts and then distribute it to the schools. But it is a fantastic, and I would definitely encourage, even if there's not money there, fundraise for it, work with your local districts. It's really such an essential part of the learning experience for so many of our kids.
Thank you. This is from another Nikki. Could Secretary Freed or Commissioner Freed talk about the connection between poverty and all of the insecurities with that, and the farm workers, not the farm owners, who work the fields, and also the impact of COVID on these farm workers?
Okay, so I touched a little bit about the impact this has had, COVID's had on the farm workers, and now I've got to try to see what between poverty and food insecurities with that and the farm workers not. Okay. Well, obviously, that it goes back into the same thing, that these farm workers are a lot of them are part of contract laborers that are overseen by Department of Labor. And they're making, they don't have the same standards. They don't, even if the $15 minimum wage, I don't know if it's even going to encompass and allow for those. So a lot of the farm workers are significantly underpaid. And so they do live in poverty. And so they do have food insecurity, unfortunately. And, you know, you even go out to Clewiston, which is part of West Palm Beach County, and which is one of the largest ag communities in the entire state. Is our largest ag county. But yet you go out to Clewiston and you go out to some of those areas, there isn't a food store for miles. And meanwhile, that's the center of ag for so much of our state. So these are things that I'm talking through with our big ag producers that may be in these communities. How do we take, you know, you guys are so profitable. How do we take money and reinvest? And a lot do. A lot are putting money into building schools and hospitals and clinics. But I keep going back to, but they have no food stores. They are living in food deserts and they are literally picking our food. We need to do a better job. And so these are things that I am on a consistent basis talking to a lot of our ag producers, really reinvesting into these communities and really helping make it a better quality of life for so many of our workforce.
Thank you. The next question from Krista is a very wide sweeping question. And it's a little bit different from the other questions that we've had, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Commissioner, what has been your biggest challenge since taking office?
I mean, besides me being the only Democrat, besides that, biggest challenge. I mean, COVID has obviously been the biggest challenge. I mean, that's above and beyond frustration. Because as most of you probably have seen, you know, the governor and I don't talk. And I have been very critical of his response to COVID and, you know, have a lot of really great ideas of how to protect our state and our citizens. And unfortunately, have had no communication trying to express, you know, the first kinds of conversations I was trying to have with the governor in March and April about COVID was exactly what I just told you all. This is what we're doing for our schools. This is what we're doing with our food banks. This is how agriculture is doing. This is what things that we could need help from DC on. And unfortunately, the governor just didn't return my phone calls. Neither did the chief of staff. So that has been a significant frustration because I ran for office to do good and to really help everybody. And so it's been a big frustration. The other challenges that I had, I guess, probably when I first got into office, if you've noticed, I don't have a cowgirl hat on. I don't have cowgirl boots. Don't have a big ag background, except for my, you know, advocacy of medical marijuana and hemp and the cannabis plant. So it took some time. It took some time traveling the state, talking to all of our ag industry, from our dairy to our fruit and vegetables to our cattlemen and everything in between. One, listening to what their issues are, listening to what their concerns are, and making them understand that I have been an advocate my entire life. From back when I was in middle school, high school, I was doing, like I said, soup kitchens to Habitat for Humanity and pride marches and civil rights marches back from when I was in high school. And so what you get in me is a fierce fighter. And so really trying to explain to ag that I might not be from ag, but by all accounts, I'm going to fight harder than you've ever seen anybody fight for you. And so we spent a lot of time last year really traveling the state, having those conversations, going to conferences, and now a year and a half into my administration, I think ag finally, they understand that I am in their corner, and I will continuously fight for them to make sure that everybody understands that they are the heart and soul of our state and our country, and are the ones who are working around the clock to make sure that our families are fed.
Thank you for that candid response, Commissioner. Question from Florence, and forgive me if you've touched on this, but she says, is the department partnering with churches who have relationships with these families to provide them with information and the resources that they can trust?
Yeah, so the way our food banks, a lot of it is through our food banks, is that we've got our state is spread broken into districts. And so each district has a specific contractor with us, whether it's, again, Second Harvest, Farm Share, Feeding Florida. And then underneath them, they have subcontracts with a lot of our nonprofits, other churches and other religious organizations, and a lot of community-based support. So we don't directly communicate necessarily with them, but certainly we have the umbrella that we work with, and that if there is a specific issue or specific need on a sector of the state, we engage. And for instance, there was an issue with one of our providers down in Miami-Dade and Miami Gardens. And it happened to be the only minority owned nonprofit in that community that was providing food. And there were some issues with their finances, and they were having some issues getting past being able to provide actual food in the community. So we engaged on that and really spent a lot of time working with that local organization that I'm not sure if it was a church or not, but it was at least a local organization, to give them information, to educate them, and to provide resources. We don't turn anybody down. If somebody needs help and assistance or has questions or needs resources from us, our team is amazing. I mean, I talk about them all the time, that I've got 4,600 employees all across the state of Florida, whose sole purpose is to doing good for the citizens of our state. And I'm so fortunate and so lucky. So anytime that there has been an issue or questions come up, regardless if we don't regulate them or we do, my team works with everybody who has questions to try to get them through whatever issues that they may have and to educate their own communities.
Thank you. Question from Mary. She's wondering about the passage of the in-force. And especially, she's asking here, could road projects, if implemented, negatively affect the food supply? And of course, there was a lot of controversy about these road projects.
Yeah. So a lot of the road projects, from, where they're going through, and a lot of the controversy was they're going through rural communities, they're going through environmentally protected areas. And really trying to go through some of the areas that make Florida, Florida. And so certainly I have not heard that any of these roads are going to go through private land to the point that they're going to impact any of our farms, because I would imagine my ag community would be pretty upset, and I would have heard an earful from them. But I have not heard that any of these roads are going to actually go through or shut down any of the ag producers in our state. If that changes as we kind of go through that, I do have 2 or 3 appointments onto these boards to create them. To create the actual where the roads are going to go. And so we have made sure that in each of the areas that we have people from our rural communities and from our farming communities that are on these task forces. So as the maps get drawn out and the roads get drawn out, that will obviously be something that we will make sure doesn't go through and implement and impact any of our farming community.
Of course, funding is a big issue for many in government these days and organizations. Could you, this is from Barbara, tell us about your funding sources for these various outreach efforts, and are you receiving any federal help, and how are you managing your department's budget at this time?
So we have a $1.9 billion budget. 1.3 of that is, I said earlier, is for the food and nutrition program. So all that money does come through the federal government. So that is for our school lunch programs. We also get we are pass-throughs for all intents and purposes. So we go and we help manage and make sure that all of the school districts are complying with all of the regulations and parameters. We also do the same thing for the food bank. So we are pass-throughs for all of our TFAP programs, and that's our food nutrition assistance programs. So that's where a lot of our money comes from. We also oversee the Office of Energy, which oversees and helps with a lot of the policies that gets created. We can't change policy, but we help to implement and give suggestions to as legislative packages come through, also to the different commissions and different, whether it's building or energy commissions, utility commissions. So our energy office is all funded from federal grant dollars. So that's money that comes down from the federal government. And then we really don't have a significantly high, I want to say it's under, that's 1.3, another. So most of our money, about $400,000, $500,000 is really where my budget comes to. I think it's maybe 600 at max. And most of that money is coming from trust dollars, and we get very little general revenue dollars. So how it works is that inside of my office, I have a huge budget team that puts together our budget. And then we, allocate it after the governor signs it and after legislature appropriates it. And we have 19 divisions. So the money is spread out all across, from our environmental areas to our ag water policies, we have a huge agricultural law enforcement, to administrative costs, to our food, nutrition, and wellness. Now we have an office of hemp. And so they get distributed kind of broadly depending on what our asks were. And so we actually, as far as agencies are concerned, are very thin. And not very, we don't have a lot of, pork in our budget at all. In fact, the presentation that I made to the legislature last year was significantly less than even my predecessor, who was a Republican, and really trying to streamline the necessities in my budget. And most of the money that actually comes in is for employees more than anything else.
I have a question from Karen. She said that animal agriculture is highly adverse to our environment. Are you making any effort to reduce it and promote a more plant-based diet?
Well, I am Commissioner of Agriculture. So animals are one of the things that we oversee, whether it's, cattle, and the cattle here in the state of Florida is actually #2 in the entire country is what we produce. So I probably would not, I was talking about one of my stepkids for about 3 months, he decided to become vegan. And I told him, don't tell anybody that. But some of the things that we are doing and that hasn't been done is that we are going through our best management practices, our what's called BMPs. And they are the rules and regulations that the ag producers are supposed to, it basically gives them a presumption that they're doing the right thing by entering into our program. And it goes through nutrients, water supply, fertilizers, and making sure that they are doing as a little as possible to protect the environment. These manuals have not been updated in almost 20 years. And so there has been an increase, obviously, in technology and research and new types of environmentally friendly products out there. So my team has been charged with going through those manuals, updating them with the newest innovative technologies and new ways to do this, make sure that they're actually working. A lot of times you might put things into motion and they end up not being as effective on trying to reduce the nutrient runoffs. So we're doing some of those things. In addition, I created our first ever Ag Innovation Committee. So what we did is we brought in some of our very forward-thinking ag producers in our state who are using new technology, different drainages, ways to reduce the usage of waters, sensors, just make sure that you know how much nutrients are necessary, GPS. I mean, the things are just so cool that we're seeing. And we also added on there people from Canada, people from Israel. Many of you may know that we took our first trade mission last year to Israel. We had a cabinet meeting, but myself and some members of my team went about 4 or 5 days prior to the rest of the cabinet so that we can meet with a lot of our producers over in Israel, a lot of the startups, and try to get a hold of what type of technology that they're using in Israel to try to bring over to the state of Florida. Because my goal is for Florida to become the Silicon Valley of the East for agriculture, because one, it's sexy for young farmers to want to be engaged in it. But two, it's better for the environment. When we're using new technology and new ways to preserve our resources, that is going to be critical as we know more and more people are moving to the state of Florida. We're going to have more people trying to build out in the state. We have sea level rising. We've got a lot of things that we're working on to kind of prevent and to promote good stewards of our land. And to be quite honest, and speaking to a lot of our farmers and especially our cattlemen, there's nobody that loves our land more than a lot of these cattlemen. And hearing what they have done to really preserve the land would be astonishing if people actually heard it. And so it's pretty cool. They know they can do better, and that they're working with us to get those resources to them.
Well, Commissioner Freed, we're at the end of our time, and I just want to thank you so much for joining us this evening, answering all the questions. And we look forward to following your work, and it's a huge job. Thank you very much.
And I just thank you all. I see that we have 160 people on. Really, I cannot thank you all enough. I met so many of you during my campaign and then up in Tallahassee, and what you have been able to do really for our state to be a strong voice every time that we see them implementing constitutional amendments wrong. And every time that there is a voter fraud issue, or dealing with Amendment 4 and everything else that you all have really been huge champions on protecting our ballots and protecting our voters. And I can't thank you enough, and know that I truly, truly mean this, that I look forward to the continued partnership that we have had with you all, and anything that I can do in my office, know that we're here.
Thank you. We look forward to it also, and we wish you a good weekend and hope that you stay safe. And everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. It's been a real pleasure to have all of you. Remember, tomorrow we have a 1 o'clock lunch and learn with past National President Carolyn Jefferson Jenkins. So thank you again, Commissioner Fried, and good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.